possible that gravity travels through dimensions?
Well, in a sense, the theory of gravity would be, if there are extra dimensions, it would be part of the theory of gravity. So let's say Einstein had his theory of gravity, the general theory of relativity, and he wrote it down for 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension. It was noticed very quickly that there was no reason for it to be 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension, that you could generalize this theory of gravity to an arbitrary number of dimensions. And so when we ask about extra dimensions, we're asking about them in some sense gravitationally. We're studying them as a space-time in the same sense that Einstein taught us to think of a space-time. So extra dimensions are very tightly bound to our understanding of gravity.
I was always taught that gravity was just a function of mass.
Yes, that's what we were all taught, and that's the Newtonian idea.
Right. And there's more to it?
There's more to it because Einstein realized that energy also creates a gravitational field around it. So that's exactly right. We would think that energy doesn't really create gravity, only big, massive stuff, the
right.
Earth, the sun. These are things that are massive enough that we notice their gravitational attraction, the
right.
center of the galaxy. And what Einstein realized also, it's a sort of simple consequence of E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, that gravity feels all forms of energy and matter, that they're interchangeable. And so if I just have a lot of energy out there, even though it's not in the form of what we usually think of as mass, I can create a gravitational field. And it might not be attractive in the normal sense that we think of as, falling onto stars, being drawn towards the Earth, circling around the center of the galaxy. So right now, our entire solar system is spiraling around the center of our Milky Way galaxy, and our galaxy is falling towards a cluster of galaxies. But we see that it can cause, in this case, a kind of repulsion in the sense that space-time stretches in the presence of certain energy.
So gravity could be part of the equation that's causing this expansion we don't fully understand?
That's right. If Einstein's theory of gravity is exactly right, then there really seems to be a dark energy. And so we really have to understand the energy balance between gravity, matter, and energy to understand exactly what's going on in the cosmos. If Einstein's theory needs some modification, maybe it's not the whole story, maybe there are things that are going on there and we have to look beyond Einstein, then it would modify our conclusions about whether or not there exists a dark energy.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the quantum world for a second.
Sure.
It's my understanding that in the quantum world, particle A in New York and particle B in Hong Kong can be observed to do movements that appear to be coordinated exactly. And yet, there is no measurable communication between particle A and particle B, and still they do this dance that's predictable, A and B. Right? Is that correct?
Yes, you can entangle particles,
yes.
is the way of saying it, and then separate them and measure what's going on with one particle, and you will somehow instantaneously know what's going on with the other particle.
Yes.
Quantum mechanics is strange, and a lot of people resist it, including Einstein. Yeah.
What did he say? Strange, spooky action or something at a distance?
Spooky action at a distance. And it was action at a distance that led Einstein to overthrow Newton. Newton's theory of gravity was phenomenally successful. There was very, very little reason to suspect there was something beyond Newton's theory of gravity. But what Einstein didn't like about it was that if an apple falls from a tree under the gravitational pull of the Earth, it seems that there's action at a distance, that the Earth is pulling the apple without touching it. That even though the Earth could be meters away from this apple, that somehow the apple's being pulled. And he thought this was spooky action at a distance. So Einstein's theory is so beautiful because it does away with that. What he said is we should think instead of gravity as curves in space, and that the Earth, what it's doing really is causing a curve or a bend in the fabric of space-time. And all the apple is doing when it falls is it's following that natural curve. So there's no longer a spooky action at a distance. The curve was created when the Earth formed into a ball. The curve sort of shaped around it, and then the apple falls the natural curve, like a ping pong falling around the curve on a canopy bed if there's a bowling ball in it. And so he had this huge leaps precisely by not believing in action at a distance. So it was kind of hard for him to have to accept it again in the form of quantum theory.
Well, I don't understand. There has to be some kind of communication that's occurring between these particles. There has to be, doesn't there?
Yes. Well, this isn't a fully understood situation. Quantum mechanics really, really challenges the intuition, and I think nobody would believe it if it weren't for the fact that it's incredibly successful, which means if I use quantum theory and I put aside the fact that I don't completely understand what's happening, that it doesn't seem physically possible to me, or it violates all my intuitions about reality and action at distance and what's right and what's possible, and I just use quantum mechanics to calculate things and make predictions, and then I go to an accelerator or a laboratory and I smash particles together and I test those predictions, it is confirmed to remarkable accuracy, greater than any theory we have.
Completely repeatable, right?
Sorry?
Completely repeatable. In other words,
completely repeatable. It matches experiments to stunning accuracy, and I think that is why physicists have had to accept something they do not fully understand. And so it's really an important issue to try to understand quantum mechanics, and it's definitely still being talked about.
Boy, there's something big there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is definitely something big there, and there's going to be something big in the unification of quantum theory with Einstein's theory of gravity, because those two things we can't seem to, at least in our pen and paper, make a mesh. They really don't seem to go together. And yet we know that very early in the universe's history, things must have been behaving quantum mechanically because it was very high energies. We're probing really microscopic physics, particle physics, and it's also a theory of gravity because we're talking about the behavior of all of space-time and all the curves in space-time in response to this quantum phenomena. And yet that whole picture of what happens when those two scales sort of compete is very foggy. And that's sort of the great hope, is that we'll have a way of understanding the universe when we understand how quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of gravity go together.
Who is doing the major work in this area now in trying to understand this?
Oh, there's many people working from many different directions. There's a huge pull with the theory called string theory, where you imagine that if you look at fundamental particles, that if you look very, very closely at these fundamental particles, you find out they're not point particles. Maybe if I look very, very closely at an electron, it's not really a dot. It's really a little loop of string. And what makes it an electron is, in a sense, the note it's playing on that little loop of string. And if I look at all of the matter in the universe, they'd all be the same little loops of string playing different notes. It's a beautiful idea. And that gravity would be, in a sense, another note played on that string. So that's a very popular theory. It's also very, very complicated, very difficult to understand. There's lots of really quite talented people working on that. And then there are other branches of quantum gravity, more canonical approaches, they're called, where they don't ask about strings and that kind of unification, but they ask about how to make space-time itself look quantum mechanical. So there's lots of groups around the world that have been working on this for the past, 80 years.
Have you thought at all about travel in time? It's one of my favorite topics. We're at the top of the hour, Doctor, so hold tight. When we come back, we will ask about time travel. My guest is Dr. Janna Levin. I'm Art Bell, and this is Coast to Coast AM. I'm very well aware that we're all traveling in time right now, in a sense, and that if we get in a rocket ship, blast off, go near the speed of light, and return to Earth, we will have seemed to have traveled in time with respect to those that we left back on Earth. But what I'm wondering about is whether this doctor, Dr. Jenna Levin, can imagine a machine that could somehow bend space and time, and so that if we were on that straw, we could suddenly jump across instead of traveling the long route, figure out a way to take the short route and get from A to B and be in a different time, either in the past or the future. We'll ask about that in a moment. Dr. Levin, how about that? Other than traveling in a spaceship near or at the speed of light, and or the normal travel we do in time every day, can you imagine the possibility of any kind of time travel to the future and or the past?
Well, actually, you can imagine it, although many people argue that physically it won't be possible. But with Einstein, since it seems to be popular to talk about Einstein tonight, he realized that as you move forward in time, as you said earlier, we all seem to be moving forward in time. It's like this current that drags us always forward in time. And what he realized is that the rate at which time passes might be different for two different observers, that somebody back on Earth might experience a different passage of time than somebody who travels on a rocket ship near the speed of light. That literally if I travel on a rocket ship near the speed of light and I come back to Earth, I might have aged 2 years, but everyone on the Earth has aged 100 years. And that this is a real possibility. That's for sure possible and happens. We see that happening in particles, things like that happening. Another question is, could I ever actually go back in time, not just slow the passage of time, but actually reverse its direction? Mm-hmm. And Einstein said, no, that is never going to be possible. But he had a very close friend named Kurt Gödel, who was an absolutely brilliant mathematician and logician. And he and Kurt Gödel used to walk to work together in Princeton in the mornings. And Einstein once said something like, I only go to the Institute these days for the pleasure of Gödel's company. And they were really intellectual peers. And Gödel was a very strange character and also a very original character. And he thought a lot about what Einstein was telling him about his theory of gravity and his theory of curved space-time. And Gödel realized that if he imagined an entire universe that was rotating, that he could prove that in such a strange universe, that's not how our universe behaves, but a hypothetical universe that was rotating, he could imagine, actually prove mathematically that it would be possible to move backwards in time. And Einstein thought this was crazy, and they argued heatedly, and they talked about it, and eventually Einstein realized, in fact, Gödel was right, that it is possible in some very strange and extreme situations to travel backwards in time. Now, this has never been physically realized. All the ways that people imagine of creating what you describe as a time machine usually involve an infinite amount of energy to build it, or so there's some kind of loophole like that that makes it physically impossible to build such a machine. So if I had an infinitely long string of energy that was traversing the universe and another string of energy that was traversing the universe that was infinitely long, and they crossed in some funny way, I might be able to find, like you said, a shortcut created by the arcs and the curves in space-time from these two crossing strings. I might be able to find some funny way to travel back in time. But to make those two strings and to make them cross would require an infinite amount of energy, so I couldn't actually build one myself. So there are no possibilities that I know of that don't have that kind of a funny loophole.
But traveling forward in time, yes.
Yes, traveling forward in time, that's an interesting question. Not exactly in the sense that you mean. I can definitely imagine making a machine where the passage of time for me will seem normal, but then when I compare how much time has elapsed from me to somebody else who's not being affected by this machine, it would be very different. They'll have aged hundreds of years, and I'll have, the civilizations will have come and gone, and I'll have only aged a year. It's, it's Planet of the Apes. They travel at the speed of light. They come back to the Earth, and something's happened. But for them, it's only been a fraction of a second. That's all within the realm of the possible. But to actually go forward, in the sense that you mean, in the way, and then come back again, or jump around like that, those are all seem to be, in a way, theoretically possible, but not actually physically possible to build the machines. But it's not that outlandish to ask about it.
The travel in a rocket ship of some sort, near the speed of light, coming back, finding yourself only a couple of years older, but everybody else hundreds of years older. That's possible, but you couldn't go the other way.
That's right. You can't go back again and say, let's say, it's the famous argument that you're referring to is the twin paradox, where there are two identical twins and one travels in a rocket ship near the speed of light and comes back to the Earth again after traveling for 3 light years, or a distance of 3 light years, and they compare their ages, and the one who's been traveling is much younger than the one who is here on Earth. But you couldn't then go back and warn your twin. When I go in my rocket ship, you can't go back and change the order of things. But if you could, it raises, even the fact that theoretically you might be able to, even if you can't physically build this machine, it requires all the energy of the universe. The fact that theoretically you can is very, very strange. And so most people, or many people, maybe not most, many people argue that they will all be protected, that there's something that we'll learn that will mean that this isn't even theoretically possible. But let's say, as Gödel did, I imagine a rotating universe and I can travel back. It leads to some very peculiar paradoxes. I could travel back in time and kill my grandparents before my parents were born, and then how could I possibly ever have been born to travel back in time to do this? So it seems to lead to possible paradoxes in how the universe evolves.
Well, I've had it suggested to me that perhaps one way out of that paradox would be, at the instant you killed your grandfather, let's say, a new bubble is formed, and a new universe is suddenly there in which things unravel in a very different way.
Yes, but Susan, it seems strange that you talked about this spooky action at a distance. Wouldn't that be the spookiest action at a distance of all? If I commit an act, I shoot a gun here in my apartment and some terrible thing happens, that the entire cosmos is replicated in some new bubble. That's really spooky action at a distance. The whole history of the universe fractures into 2 splits. There are these discussions, but this is something that I myself find, unpalatable. And then there are 2 branches where one thing happened and another thing happened. So that's not the most satisfying resolution to my mind. But what is an interesting resolution is this, and it's really difficult to kind of stomach, is the possibility that I'm not free to make every choice that I think I'm free to make, and that I can only make choices that are compatible in some sense with the laws of physics. And if the laws of physics say that I was born and I went back in time, I'm not going to be able to change that history. And I will be born again, and those things will happen as they were before. And that this idea that we have infinite free will to make choices is maybe not a good idea, maybe not a correct idea. But I have to say, having said that, there are people who feel that they can prove that such strange things can happen, even if you just talk about billiard balls without any reference to free will. So it is also an active discussion.
You've written about mathematicians, and you think that many of them have suffered mental illnesses. What about Einstein?
Yeah, it's interesting. Einstein, I don't think, was mentally ill by any stretch of the imagination. He might have been peculiar and eccentric and certainly quirky, had his own sort of personal quirks and ups and downs and character flaws, but I don't think anybody would say he was anywhere near mentally ill. I believe that he had a child who was institutionalized, though. And I'm not completely clear on that history. But I don't really want to say, I'm not a psychoanalyst, and I don't really know that much about the chemistry of the brain, so I don't want to project this claim that mental illness and genius go hand in hand. I don't really want to say that. But I do think that maybe some kind of eccentricity and a certain kind of, if not brilliance, maybe that's not the right word, but obsessiveness about nature or mathematics, maybe that goes hand in hand, in that the people who are willing to devote their lives to the pursuit of some of the most abstract truths of nature are a different kind of people, and that maybe makes them vulnerable to having slightly different stories for their personal lives.
Was Einstein that different from all the rest of us?
In a lot of ways, I'd like to say no. He's just a person, if you look at how Einstein, I mean, I think he's an extraordinary person. He's obviously a huge hero of mine. But one of the things I think is lovely about him and thinking about him and talking about him is that he was not an overly mathematical person. When he thought about physics, he thought in the most simple, beautiful, and intuitive terms. He used to perform thought experiments where he imagined what it would be like to travel at the speed of light, or he imagined these two twins, or these kinds of thought experiments are what led him to his greatest discoveries. So he wasn't a person who was overly mathematical. He really did struggle with the mathematics. And there's something about that that's beautiful. It speaks, I think, to all of our abilities. That we all have of thinking about the world that we live in and relating to the world that we live in. So in some sense, I think we all have this ability, and I think that's also what's so exciting about it, is that if you're from one country or another country, if you're one shape and size and another shape and size, we all seem to have the wiring that allow us to think about these things and share in common the mathematics when it's discovered and the ideas. And so there's something beautiful about that it transcends all these national boundaries. And so in that sense, yes, I think he is another human being and is as connected to us as any other human being.
Do we have anybody today that would be in Einstein's caliber?
That's so hard to say. Nobody would have known Einstein was in Einstein's caliber. He once said about himself, "When I was a student, I was no Einstein." He wasn't a great student who showed off all this great talent, who was a superstar with awards and had this great itinerary. You could quote, he had gone here and there. He wasn't that kind of a person. He was kind of a flunky who, I mean, everybody knew he was, I think, bright and talented. I think maybe that's a little overstated, but he was working in a patent office in Bern, Switzerland, because he could not get a job in physics. And so what if Einstein had never pursued physics in those circumstances? What if he had given up and become an industrialist, or decided to do his own patents? Or would we know he was Einstein? I think that it's very hard to say who is and who isn't of that caliber. I think all we can reflect on is the actual achievements. And we might not know who that person, even if they're around today making these big strides, the person who's going to quantize gravity might be one of my colleagues. I mean, it's really hard to know.
Sure. Minus Einstein, would we have the atomic bomb today?
Probably not.
Oh, really?
Well, not because he built the bomb or was that instrumental in the design or the building of the bomb, but because he recognized E equals mc squared, and that energy and matter can be interconverted, that you can lose mass in the form of energy. And with his discoveries that helped people to understand quantum theory, people began to develop the tools that they needed to do something like build a bomb. But you have to understand, I mean, there's something Bohr allegedly said one time. Bohr was a famous physicist from Copenhagen who was working on quantum theory. He once said something funny like, "Oh, I'm sure nobody's thought of a way to use theoretical physics to kill people." I think they had no idea that they could harvest a weapon from this when they were first working on the ideas of quantum mechanics.
And so you think it entirely possible that minus Einstein, we really might not have the bomb even today?
Well, I think it's entirely possible.
Wow.
But you know, maybe a historian of science would argue with me that quantum mechanics would have been developed without Einstein, and that quantum mechanics would have led to the bomb even without Einstein. And maybe I should say, eventually down the line, somebody would have discovered quantum mechanics. I mean, it wasn't Einstein who discovered it alone. There were many, many, many people who contributed. Heisenberg, Schrodinger, Bohr, all these great minds. And,
sure, but
and they would have done that without Einstein. They didn't need Einstein to do any of that. They all did that on their own. So I guess you could say, yes, quantum theory would have been discovered. But would we have put it to the test of building a bomb if history hadn't unfolded exactly the way it did? Well, I don't know.
That's fascinating to contemplate. And you really can't say whether there's anybody at Einstein's level today.
I think there probably are. I think there probably are at any given moment in time. Whether or not they achieve what Einstein achieved, that's shaped by so many factors. So, Yeah, so maybe all my colleagues are Einsteins, and none of us have just really, hit the bullseye yet. Or I'm surrounded by some pretty phenomenally talented and smart people, and I certainly wouldn't pretend to know the limits of their abilities. I imagine I'm surrounded by many people who could one day do something like that.
Is there anybody currently moving up toward the theory of everything?
Yeah, so this is also connected with the quantum theory of gravity. People who work on string theory, Brian Greene has books on string theory, or Lee Smolin has books on quantum gravity, and they cite lots of the people who are practicing in the field today. And yes, people are definitely making strides towards a theory of everything. That is to say that I will understand one day that even though I think I'm different than my cup, and I think my cup is different than light, and I think light is different than gravity, I will one day find out that they're all different sides of the same coin. That just as ice looks really different from steam, if I look at it the right way, I realize that really they're different states of the same kind of material. Mm-hmm. And maybe I will discover everything in the universe is really unified in one simple idea, one simple kind of thing, and that it just looks different, as though it's different energy scales or different manifestations of the same thing. And many people are working towards that today.
Is there any way to even guess if we did come up with this theory of everything, or a simple, I think somebody said perhaps an equation no longer than your thumb would give us a theory of everything, what would we then have, and what might that lead to? As Einstein gave us information that led to the bomb, what can we imagine the theory of everything might lead to?
Oh, I don't think we can imagine, because Einstein's theory also gave us, maybe he didn't discover it, but people discovered it as a consequence of his theory, a realization that the universe had a beginning. That's tremendous. That the universe is expanding, that there are black holes, that space-time is curved and bent, that we can see things like lensing of light around curved spaces. All of this Einstein gave us. Einstein gave us many beautiful things. And I think that whatever comes next could give us absolutely as many wild and difficult to predict kinds of phenomena. So it would really change how we think about the universe. For instance, if we had that theory of everything, those questions we talked about at the beginning of the show, how was the universe created? What was there before the Big Bang? How big is space? Is it infinite? Is it finite? Are there extra dimensions? All of these things would come into focus. So that's why it's so important and so exciting. We really could start to get a handle on what now seem like totally elusive questions.
It does seem totally elusive, and I wonder if it's something that some very bright person will just sort of stumble into in the same way that you explained Einstein, kind of just in a simple way and not a deeply mathematical way, discovered what he did.
Sure, but he was really also working in a specific moment in history. Einstein might not have made sense 200 years earlier. He might not have been able to do some of the things he had done with special relativity. It really took Maxwell before him. So we're all building pieces of the puzzle, and there's all these people who have contributed these incredible ideas, and we know that they somehow really seem to be the pieces. They just don't fit together yet. So whoever comes next who makes that final link will be building from all of these pieces of the puzzle that these generations of scientists have put together before them.
Okay. I'd like you to tell me about your book. You wrote a book called A Madman Dreams as Turing Machines, as a novel, right?
Yes, that book is on the fiction shelves.
It's fiction. And so I'd like you to explain to me, if you can, why, as a scientist with your background, you decided to write a book of fiction.
Sure. It's a book that sticks very close to fact, and it's based on two mathematicians who are real historical figures. And I was playing on the idea that no matter how close to fact you try to adhere, you can't always get to truth, that sometimes truth is a little bit elusive.
Right. We're already at a break. I'm sorry, Doctor.
That's
I should not have started you. After the break, we'll pick up at exactly this point. My guest is Dr. Jenna Levin. From the high desert, we're all moving through time roughly at about exactly the same speed. And I guess we can't change it. I'm Art Bell. Here I am. Dr. Jenna Levin is my guest, and she is certainly well qualified to write a straight-on science book, but she didn't. She wrote a work of fiction. Now, I wonder why. I wonder if it would be that a scientist like herself, in order to properly express herself, has to move beyond that which is proven and repeatable to really put a good book together. We'll ask in a moment. All right, Doctor, your novel, I guess, A Madman Dreams as Turing Machines, an odd title.
Yeah, the title refers to Turing, who was a mathematician, a British mathematician, who was instrumental in breaking the German Enigma code during World War II. He was also brilliant in many ways. He had many accomplishments, and he invented the idea of what was later coined a Turing machine after him. And the Turing machine essentially evolved into the modern computer. But you could also think of Turing machines as any machine on which you can mechanize thought. So you can teach a machine to add and to subtract and to multiply. And Turing ultimately believed that you could teach a computer to think, to have artificial intelligence. And then he ultimately thought that we were really machines, actually, just biological ones. So the title is a reference to all of that.
Okay. And the basis of your novel, during the break I said, why would a scientist of your caliber, for example, decide to write a novel? Is it because some of the ideas and thoughts you have simply cannot be substantiated by good, hard, repeatable science, and so to express yourself, you have to go there?
Well, I think that there's two answers. One is that I am absolutely drawn to the lack of ambiguity of science. I find that very moving, personally moving, that what I can calculate, you can calculate, that I'm not just telling somebody something about the Big Bang. They're welcome to come and study it and see if they can reproduce it. And if I'm wrong, that they can show me I'm wrong, and we would eventually have to agree. And that's beautiful and really humbling, I think. And I love that about science. But what I wanted to do in the novel was really communicate a feeling about that I think is very hard to convey, that ultimately this is a human endeavor, and human beings are making these discoveries. And human beings have tragic and beautiful stories. We all dream of something great, and yet we all have, sorrows. And I wanted to convey something about the feeling of the pursuit of truth and the specific story of some of the great minds in the last century. And I felt that the fictionalized form really lends itself to that. It can hit you in the gut, so to speak, and
sure.
And allow you to really experience, to feel it, and to see it, and to sense it. And so I was excited about doing that. And I think there is something about truth being elusive, too. And that was just to say quickly, these two people I was talking about, Kurt Gödel, who was the person we spoke about earlier who showed Einstein that you could travel back in time, and Alan Turing, this great code breaker, that together they proved that there are some truths, even about something as simple and elementary as numbers, that could never be proven to be true. This is absolutely shocking to people at the time, that there are some facts, even about numbers, that are so complex that never in the history of time will we ever be able to prove them. And so there's something about the very nature of truth being elusive that I also wanted to convey.
Did you see the movie Artificial Intelligence?
I didn't, sadly.
Oh, my goodness. Then I guess we can't talk about it.
Well, I'll make a note.
Make a note by all means to see that. Do you believe that we will reach a point with computer power and storage or whatever it takes and actually get a machine that is capable of being conscious?
It's really a fascinating question. I think that, yes, it will be possible one day to do that. But again, if somebody can come along and prove me wrong, that's what's so exciting is that, I will have to accept that if that's what somebody shows. But I really think that Turing, in this sense, was right, that one day you will be able to make a complex intelligence. I don't think you can code one. That is to say, I don't think one person's going to sit down and write a code that creates an artificial intelligence. In fact, I think that's impossible. But I think what you could do is you could write a simple code, creating a simple kind of, if you like, digital organism, and allow that organism to evolve under certain kind of prescribed digital forces in a kind of digital universe. And that simple organism could evolve an intelligence complex enough that we would have to recognize it as a real artificial intelligence.
Huh. Gödel believed in the soul, Turing not.
Yes.
How about you?
Well, I in metaphorical sense, can talk about the soul. I'm a lover of art, and I obviously love books and literature, and I have a very strong sense of all of that. But in the sense that Gödel meant, no, I don't believe in a soul in the sense that Gödel meant. And I'm very moved by Turing's kind of shift to a kind of materialism. He had sort of religious views that were cobbled together and were kind of confused when he was very young. But when he came to his big ideas about building a computer, what we now call a computer, he sort of had this kind of materialist epiphany that the universe was just exactly what you see before you. It was just stuff and matter, and that we were biological machines, and you could make artificial intelligence. And it was a beautiful moment, not a tragic moment for him. And I think that's very interesting, that he could have this relationship to the world that did not involve a soul, but was just as beautiful and meaningful, maybe more so for him than before. Whereas Gödel, on the other hand, really did believe in transmigration of the soul. And he really did believe in another reality, in some sense, that the mind was able to reach through pure thought. And, Gödel was also a paranoid schizophrenic. And, well, I'm not sure that diagnosis would still hold up. That is how he was diagnosed when he was alive, as a paranoid schizophrenic. But I don't say that to diminish his views or to diminish his beliefs. He was really a great mind, and he was a very intensely logical person. And yet he still sustained these ideas.
What is it, Doctor, that in science that makes you believe we don't have immortal souls?
Well, I guess in the sense that I think people mean, it's again, it falls under all those categories of things that interact with physical reality, but yet aren't of physical reality. That seems to me to be an outright contradiction. If my soul is capable of moving an apple or, changing something about the world, then it is physically in the world, and therefore why not just discuss it physically, whatever that thing is? Why try to have it both ways? It is material and physical and in the world, and not material and not physical and not in the world. And so I don't feel the need to try to separate those two artificially, and it seems a contradiction to me. And I'm not unhappy with the idea that what we emerge as people, as personalities, and all our memories, and that is something that is beautiful and human and to be cherished and valued. I still have all those kinds of feelings about it.
Well, though, I can understand if you decided, for whatever reason, that there was no immortal soul, you might become very materialistic. You might turn in that direction. Is that logical?
Yeah, well, by materialistic in that sense, I don't mean valuing material goods, because Turing had...
No.
Yeah, but as a materialist, I understand the sense in which you mean it. But just to clarify, Turing was a very stoic person. He didn't value possessions. He was very kind and very moral and sort of... honest, forthright person. But yes, I think that if you don't turn to things out of nature, you're more able to make discoveries about nature. I guess that's all I'm saying. I mean, I don't project on people what they should or should not believe about what's beyond nature. But if I did that, if I came to a mystery and said, oh, look, this is beyond nature, I wouldn't be a scientist because I wouldn't be able to make discoveries. If Einstein came up and said, oh, the apple falling from a tree, that's spooky action at a distance, but maybe that's just beyond nature, we would have none of our discoveries, and we would continue every time we came to a gap in our knowledge and give up, throw our arms up. But that's not how the history of science has progressed, and I find it so exciting to always, when you come to that great mystery and that great void, to believe that it can be understood through nature and to make that progress and to thereby feel connected to the cosmos as a whole by making these discoveries.
If you, Doctor, came toward the end of your life and somebody had indeed stumbled into artificial intelligence, or perhaps not, but had come up with a solution, for example, to take the essence of what you are, everything in your brain, and download it to a machine, that would allow you to continue your mental existence, would you do that to ensure your continuation?
What a funny, interesting question. Let's say that was possible. I don't know what to say. I think life is rich because of things, not just the intellectual life, which obviously is very important. But maybe not. But then again, maybe I'd like to see who quantizes gravity in the end.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, there is a natural mortal fear of death, and particularly so if your view was that there was nothing that follows it at all. Mm-hmm. If you then had the opportunity to stick around and see what developed in the world, even if it was just as a pure mental essence, it may indeed, in your lifetime, become possible to do exactly that. Scientists are talking about the eventual ability to virtually take a mind and download it to a machine.
Yeah, I'd be very suspicious if that was possible because of the reasons that we discussed, which is that is such a complex task. You can almost mathematically prove it's beyond the complexity of human beings to actually implement like that. But this is different than saying complexity could evolve under a series of forces. But could one mind sit there and write a code that's as complex as you would need to do what you're describing? And I think that is almost, you could say, mathematically highly, highly unlikely. But as a philosophical question, I think you have to take the whole picture. Would it be torture to be conscious for thousands of years? Is it something that can be handled by just a neural network without it kind of finding the weight of that too enormous? I don't know.
It might be. I'm not sure. Now, I'm supplied with information before the show, and some of it is just amazing to me. I mean, your academic credentials are impeccable, and it says here you didn't graduate from high school?
Oh, yeah.
Now, let's go back and examine that a little bit. What happened? How in the world did you climb into the world that you're now in and not graduate from high school? How did that happen?
They're going to revoke my degree. Someone's going to listen to the show and revoke my degree.
I doubt that.
I was, a slightly sort of intense teenager, and I wasn't that bad. I really wasn't that bad, but around my 17th birthday, I think it was, it was clear that something needed to happen. And I'm the third daughter in my family, and I think my parents were happy to find a constructive alternative to my entering, a really crazy teenage phase. I was in a car accident when I was 17. It was crazy. And I didn't go back to high school, and I applied to college. And I just did it on a whim. Somebody pulled me aside from my high school, literally grabbed me by the elbow and told me, you should do this. You'll be happier, you'll be calmer, you'll be more settled. And I did. I applied to Barnard College in New York. It was the only school actually I applied to because it was such an awkward time. It wasn't an appropriate time for me to be applying to college. And by some very lucky fluke, they accepted me. I mean, it was just an act of generosity on their part. And
well, you say you were 17, so you must have been on the verge of graduation or fairly close.
It was, I turned 17 that summer, and 2 months later I went to college. So I was a year short. I was a year short.
That's absolutely amazing.
I just went to college. It was crazy. It was very exciting. And so instead of becoming like a totally unmanageable teenager in my parents' home, I instead felt very grateful for this opportunity. And I was living in New York. It was very fun and very exciting, so I had a lot of outlets. And I felt really, really kind of privileged.
Were you not happy in high school? Were you bored?
It'd be kind of, I could say, oh, it was all beneath me. It wasn't even so much like that, nothing like that. It was just that I guess we were moving a lot, and and we had switched schools, and I guess there was nothing that was really that urgent for me to finish at the time in high school. I mean, it's not as though I had taken all the classes. I had no physics and no math when I started college. I had never taken physics, and I thought physicists built bombs, and I thought physicists memorized equations, and I had a very negative impression of what science was all about, which to me now is just hilarious looking back. You know, karmically, I was somehow destined because of that bad attitude to become a physicist, and I was interested in philosophy, and I was going to come and be interested in art and philosophy. And I
what in the world sent you in this direction then?
Yeah, it was
there must
really,
have been a moment.
It was nearly halfway through college before I realized that I wanted to do this. It was like a complete shift. But I was studying philosophy, and I felt that while the questions were deep and important and interesting, that there was so much argumentation that I didn't know who to believe, and I didn't like this idea that I had to believe somebody. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that when people talked about science, when they talked about what Albert Einstein did, when they talked about quantum theory, that it wasn't open for argument anymore. You could sit down and do the calculation yourself, and you could prove for yourself what they had proved for themselves. So it wasn't a matter of taking someone's word for it anymore. And I thought that was incredibly powerful and incredibly exciting, that I could ask deep, philosophical, meaningful questions, but I could actually answer them with these unambiguous tools and get real answers that I could believe in, and that I could change my opinion on the basis of observations. And all of this was very exciting to me. And so I made this very radical shift into astronomy and physics.
Well, all of this is very exciting. It's a very exciting field, of course. It's worth asking you, to a lot of the average people who are listening right now, why is cosmology, why should it be interesting, why should it be relevant or important in any way at all? Most of the people out there walking around right now.
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's a fair question. I think everyone finds it exciting and thrilling. I think there's very few people who say, I don't even want to know about that, and I don't want to know about the beginning of the universe. But yet it's a good question to ask. We live in troubled times. There's no question these are troubled times, and why should we care about cosmology when this is going on? And I think it's exactly that reason. I think that when we think about the cosmos, it changes our entire view of the world, and it changes our understanding of ourselves. If you think back about the Copernican shift, people used to think that the Earth was the center of the solar system, that the sun orbited the Earth, and that led to a certain cultural attitude and a certain belief system. And when we were displaced from the center of the cosmos, when we realized that we orbit the sun, and the sun orbits the galaxy, and in fact the galaxy is just one galaxy out of billions of galaxies in a cosmos that's incredibly vast, I think it puts in perspective who we are on this planet. And that kind of maybe that moment of loneliness that we feel being adrift in this nearly infinite universe, or even if it's finite, this huge universe, I think makes us look around at other human beings and value that and think differently about what we're fighting over and what's significant and what's meaningful. So I think it's essential to understanding ourselves and the world.
Okay. Let me ask you about this. A week ago, I interviewed a scientist intimately involved in this whole global warming business that we're going through right now. Mm-hmm. And she had, unless we make very quick and very big changes, a very dire forecast for humanity. I'm sure that you've kind of taken a glance at all of this going on. What is your view?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've only taken a glance, but there was a time where at Columbia, a group of us who worked together on cosmology and particle physics and string theory, very, very abstract stuff, sat down to discuss climate change. And we took out some of the articles, and we looked at some of the calculations, and we discussed some of the science. And it went on for hours. We were so gripped by it, this completely different kind of a problem. And while I don't feel expert enough to in any way put forth an opinion about what the timescales are, that would really be, I'd be pretending if I thought I could do that. I think that it certainly, it looks like we have to worry and we have to do something fast. Now, whether or not we can make a change, I really have to trust the people who have been studying this for so long and their opinions about that. But we did make a change with the ozone layer. We have to be optimistic that we can get a grip and reverse the course of things.
Perhaps we can. If we want to be around long enough to answer some of the questions that I know you very much want answered. Dr. Levin, hold tight. When we get back, we'll go to the phones. I'm Art Bell. I so identify with that song all my life. I've been a creature of the night. Good morning, everybody. Dr. Janna Levin is our guest. A brilliant mind indeed. Now, two of the mathematical geniuses that she wrote about, talked about tonight, Gödel, for example, how did he end? Apparently starved himself to death, fearing the food that was offered up was poisoned. So he starved himself to death. Turing, it says here, bit from a poison apple. We'll ask about that one, both, in fact, in a moment. Before we go to the phones, Doctor, just a couple of things. Gödel, starving yourself to death because you're afraid your food would be poisoned?
Yeah, as I said, he was really diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I mean, he didn't have hallucinations of purple elephants or anything like that. He in a sense, had kind of logical, I'm not sure if I would call them hallucinations exactly, but paranoid fantasies. You know, they weren't totally outrageous, but they weren't true either. And he was a severe hypochondriac and used to keep incredible detailed diaries about his bodily functions and was always terrified something was going to happen to him, and that the coal in his apartment when he lived in Europe was poisoning him, which actually it might have been, but and then later when he lived here in this country, he also had very strange behavior, wearing layers and layers of clothes in the heat and the cold, you know, but in the heat, and he fell prey to these delusions that the government was trying to poison his food. And his wife, who was 8 years his senior, used to really nurse him back to health over and over again and spoon-feed him food. He was several times in his life dangerously emaciated. But when she fell ill, there was really nobody to help him. And when she became incapacitated physically, he really spiraled out of control. And he died of self-starvation.
Right, tragic. It's
an
Turing.
Unbelievable story. This is also why, even though the book that I wrote is fiction, I stick very close to fact because the most incredible and strange elements in this story are true. And you can't make that stuff up.
And Turing and the poison apple?
Well, Turing comically loved the movie Snow White, and apparently it was Gödel's favorite movie too. And this reference to the poison apple, if you remember the queen poisons an apple and Snow White bites in the poison apple, and yes. he did commit suicide. There was some theories that the government had in fact poisoned Turing, but I think that that's unlikely. I think he did commit suicide, and he laced an apple with cyanide, and he bit from it. This is at a time in his life when he was recovering from hormone therapy, which he was subjected to by the British government because he had been convicted of homosexual activity, which was illegal at the time. So you have this very tragic story of this war hero who is then really betrayed by his country and essentially poisoned with these severe hormone therapies, which left him obese and depressed. And he eventually commits suicide. It's an unbelievable story. You could not make that up. No,
you couldn't. And both of them mathematical geniuses.
Absolutely. People call Gödel the most important logician since Aristotle. And certainly Turing was really a great genius. We are living in a time of incredible influence from both Gödel and Turing in terms of the world that we live in, the computer digital age, that we owe a lot to them.
All right, we're going to go to the phones. A lot of people would like to speak with you, and so away we go, all the way to Florida. Charles in Florida, you're on with Dr. Levin. Hi.
Hi. I'm absolutely fascinated with this great mind of Einstein's. I'm not a religious person traditionally, I guess, but this is a man who went from atheism to agnostic to a believer in some kind of a creator. Mm-hmm. And I'll just tell you, I communicate and exchange telephone conversations with a nuclear physicist, and he signed a non-disclosure agreement. I'm convinced there is a very simplistic explanation in this theory of everything. And I think it does include a creator, but there just is nothing but material things out there in the universe. I just tell you, I think there's three things that are very interesting. First of all, there is the standard in the universe, I believe. There is no beginning and there is no end in multiple universes, number one. Number two, there is such a diversity in size. If we went back to Roman times and this wonderful lady brought a pocketbook with a microscope in it, and a man was coming out of a Roman bath and put a towel around him, and you grabbed his hand and put it under the microscope. He wouldn't believe what he'd see because he can't see bacteria back then. Now, I suggest to you, beyond your wildest dreams, how stupid is mankind? We believe we're the largest things in the universe. We have proportionally a view under the microscope of bacteria, and yet on the other end of the size spectrum is there life. I believe there is. I don't believe there's any standard other than infinity in every direction. And I believe time is amazingly observable in our lifetime as we escalate through the universe at higher and higher velocities. Our planet, we are stretching time every day, and that appearance of the stretch of time occurs with the higher and higher velocities. And as we get older, I'm getting to be pretty old, as we get older, we notice not a speeding up of time, but a stretching of time and observance of more physical events occurring in what may be a 40-day month instead of a 30-day calendar month on the wall. And I just believe there's so much fluid nature to the whole universe. Man has to stop for a minute and realize there is a consistency between biblical text and scientific fact if you connect the dots. And there is. Yeah. Okay.
All right, caller, hold it there, and let's take a response to whatever you'd like to respond to.
Well, let's start in the beginning with the comments. I think that Einstein is sometimes referred to as being a believer in God, but that's not historically accurate. It's my understanding that Einstein used the word God often poetically, and he was very clear that he did not believe in God. Now, whether or not people out there agree with him, it's very clear that Einstein himself really did not believe in God in the sense that I think people mean. He was used the word in a poetic term, like God does not play dice, or I want to know God's thoughts. But he very clearly said that he did not believe in a supernatural entity. And again, I think yet he's very, in some sense, also a very deep, spirited person, and so and was drawn to the magic of the universes for his understanding, for his sense of meaning. I also want to say that there's an interesting way of saying I really believe, as the caller said, there are other universes out there. I really believe that time is like this, and that's interesting. And I will sometimes use that to have a direction in my research. I'll say I really believe the universe is finite. It just makes sense to me. But I know that I can change my belief system because really what matters is the evidence. And without the evidence, my belief isn't important, even to me. It's just a way that I use to have intuition, to ask good questions and should try to make scientific progress. But at the end of the day, what matters is what observations reveal to me. And if observations reveal to me something different, I'm excited about changing my mind about that. And there was just one other thing that I think is funny to comment on, that there was the caller mentioned that time seems different as we get older, that it seems as though we have more experiences or we can pack more experiences in, and that actually can be understood physically in some sense, that our psychological perception of the passage of time can have to do with changes in entropy. Entropy is a measure, in a sense, of information. And that when you're very young, everything is new information. You have a smaller storage of information in some sense. And everything you perceive is big changes in information. And that can make time seem slow. And our psychological perception of time will change as we get more and more information literally stored in our brains because we perceive the acquisition of information differently. So it's really actually a kind of funny thing to think about.
All right. Marty in Indianapolis, your turn with Dr. Levin.
Hi, Art. It's a real thrill to talk to you. I'm listening on 1070, and I must say that I love the doctor's laugh.
Thank you. Sometimes I laugh too much when I'm on the radio, I have to admit.
No. My question was on the nature of gravity. You used an analogy about a ping pong ball on a bedspread, and it makes sense, but it just seems like a larger version of a ball rolling down a hill. Now, why are things attracted to each other. Art, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book The Universe is a Green Dragon, but it seems to it tells me that this science has not explained really what gravity is. It's just an attraction, an abstract. The author uses the word love. I'm not sure if she can elaborate on what really gravity is.
Well, yeah, so I think there is something interesting. Let's say I imagine a curve in space, and I say something follows the natural curve. I think you're asking a good question, which is, why does something have to follow the curve towards the Earth? Why couldn't it follow the curve away from the Earth, for instance? How is there directional information? But the curves really do have, in some sense, directional information. They tell you how things move in time and which direction that would go in space-time. So they're not just curves in space, they're curves in space-time. And to follow the natural curve in space-time also involves that you go towards the mass. And so really Einstein's theory being generalized to space and time does explain the attraction that ordinary masses feel towards each other. But again, we discussed this other form of energy, this dark energy, which seems to have a repulsive character, that it causes space to actually stretch and expand faster and faster. So you really have to look at this theory to see exactly what happens, but I would say that we do understand that aspect of it.
Okay. Dave in Toronto, Canada, you're on with Dr. Jenna Levin. Hi.
Good morning. Doctor, if you were to take a ball, absolutely hard, no give to it, assumably, and throw it against a wall that has no give to it, assumably, when the ball bounces back to whatever degree it can bounce, does it have to stop when something changes direction, given perfect hardness or whatever, as opposed to a sponge ball? Does it have to stop completely to reverse direction? At some point, does it come to a dead stop and reverse direction?
Well, yes. If I did that idealized experiment you're talking about, you would see that the velocity came to a dead stop, but the change in the velocity, which we call the acceleration, did not come to a dead stop. It was quite the opposite. So it's because it feels this acceleration, it's causing it to speed up again in the other direction. But yes, under the deceleration, when it hits the wall, it does come to a dead stop in reverse direction.
And if you don't mind, if I'd like to make one more point, I think there is a difference between your classic genius, be it in the art realm, no joke intended, no pun intended, and maybe a physicist who thinks left brain, right brain, versus an artist. But geniuses, I think, are inherently different because they see a wider spectrum. So when you put them in an ordinary situation, daily life, drive a cab, 9 to 5, so forth and so on, they're due to go mad because they have so much going on in their head that there is simply a difference between that person and the person who's perfectly content to drive the cab, not always, but perfectly content to drive a cab 9 to 5 his whole life and never question anything, sees the world in black and white terms. And I don't think that has to do with I think it has to do, in fact, with the fact that the person may have an exceedingly high IQ, given to strange machinations of thinking as an artist, and I think they are inherently different. Could you elaborate on that? I'll be off the phone. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think that it's a fair point to be taken that the types of people who are really examining the world that they're in at all times might be vulnerable to more extreme highs and lows because there's more rapture and there's more devastation and more sorrow. And so I think, that extremity, I can understand why people feel that there is a psychological link, but whether or not this is a biological link is what I don't know, or what I wouldn't want to conjecture. I don't believe that you have to be biologically different in literally the chemicals in your brain to be this way. I think that there are, character choices, there are There's the choice to examine the world we live in, or the choice to put blinders on, and that might have more to do with character than with biology. But who am I to say? I'm not a neuroscientist or a cognitive scientist or a behavioral scientist. So maybe those people can team together to say.
He makes a good point, though. He really does. Okay, here's John in Linwood, Washington. You're on the air with Dr. Levin. Hi.
Yeah, hi, Art. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
Yeah, a pleasure to talk to you. I enjoy your program. I got a question about time travel. Personally, I kind of question that. And so I'm wondering if the doctor could kind of present the scenario that most people would propose at this point in time. Would it be like a machine or incantation, or how would that be?
Well, all right, we kind of covered that earlier, and she suggests that time travel to the future is certainly possible under certain conditions and probably not to the past at all.
But how would it happen? Through what mechanism?
Well, I can only say this. You can imagine a whole universe that's kind of rigged to allow that to happen, but I don't think anyone has imagined a machine that you could build in a laboratory. And so, I don't think people really take seriously that they're going to build a machine to make time travel happen. I think they're just curious about what it means philosophically, if it's possible, even in a hypothetical universe that rotates or with crossing strings or some other very peculiar circumstance, which you could not reproduce in a laboratory.
What about wormholes?
Well, wormholes don't necessarily induce time travel. They just connect two regions of space. So it's like saying, suppose I want to get from New York to New Jersey, but I think I have to go the long way around the globe. So it's going to take me a very long time. And then I discover I can go the short way around. I mean, a wormhole can provide a short bridge between two regions of space-time that seem like they're far apart. And then you find out there's this little bridge making them closer together. But they don't necessarily, unless they're very peculiar, unless they're rigged in some very peculiar way, mean that they're going to cause travel backwards in time.
The event horizon of a black hole?
The event horizon of a black hole does not induce time travel. It does slow down time relative to an observer far away. So let's say some poor astronaut is falling in towards a black hole, and I'm a safe distance away in a spaceship, and I'm watching them. It would look to me like it's taking an infinite amount of time for them to fall through the black hole. But the astronaut, as far as they're concerned, thinks they pass right through the event horizon and right through to down the throat of the black hole. So our perceptions of time become extremely relative.
Mm-hmm. Any danger in CERN's work? They actually may produce a small black hole. Any concerns about that, Doctor?
Yeah, I have no concerns about that. I think that I think that's kind of fascinating, grabs people's imaginations. But no, I don't think something like that's going to happen. I think the energy scales that CERN's talking about and what's physically possible, it's all very safe stuff. And that experiment is a very important experiment because it's going to reproduce conditions much earlier in the universe's history in a way that we've never been anywhere near before. And so we could learn a lot, for instance, even about the existence of extra dimensions. There might be a way to see if there are extra dimensions by going to these high energies. So it's really exciting. What a lot
of careers hanging on what might happen there.
In a way, yeah, a lot of careers are hanging on some of the results, and of course, many people have been involved in building the experiment itself.
Indeed, so. All right, hold tight. Dr. Jana Levin is my guest. You're listening to Coast AM, talking about the things I just love to talk about, that which is all around us. That which we still don't fully understand. From the high desert, we'll be back with more in a moment. Here I am, Dr. Jana Levin is my guest, a great mind, obviously. Here's a kind of an interesting article that I'll expand on tomorrow night. There's so very much up there. Astronomers have detected water in the atmosphere of a planet outside our solar system for the first time. The finding, to be detailed in an upcoming issue of Astrophysical Journal, confirms previous theories that say water vapor should be present in the atmospheres of nearly all the known extrasolar planets. Even hot Jupiters, gaseous planets that orbit closer to their stars than Mercury to our sun, are thought to have water. discovery, announced today, a couple of days ago now, means one of the most crucial elements for life as we know it can exist around planets orbiting other stars. And there seem to be an infinite number of other stars, so much more than we can even imagine. So, aren't the odds on our side? Even if there's no soul, immortal soul, if there's no God, with all we know and all we can see, let's ask the good doctor, doesn't there have to be other life out there? Other life, very much perhaps like us. We'll be right back. Doctor, if we're not this wonderfully created race by God, we're not this unusual, rare thing, and we look out and the first planet we see around another sun has the building blocks of life, isn't it almost a sure bet that out there is life, very much like ours? Well,
I would say half of that I totally agree with. I agree that it's extremely likely there is other life out there. I am not convinced it's extremely likely they're anything like us. If we look at the history of life on the planet, we're a really unsuccessful species. We've only been around for 100,000 years, and in the past 100, where we've nearly wrecked the planet completely with industrial revolution, and there's no evidence that we're a successful species. We might come and go in the bleep of an eye if we're not careful. And a very successful set of animals are animals like dinosaurs. They were roaming the planet for hundreds of millions of years, and they never destroyed the planet. And so if we also look at the variety of life on the Earth, from microorganisms to the wild and rich number of organisms in the oceans, why should we think that another life form looks just like us? I think that's the part that is a wild leap for me personally, and I think if you counted literally probabilities, is it very likely that on another planet organisms just like us evolved? And that doesn't seem likely at all. But what does seem likely is that there's other life. Maybe they're only amoebas, or maybe there was a civilization that came and went. Or maybe, they breathe a different kind of air and they have different numbers of limbs and, everything's totally different. Maybe they float. I mean, who knows the variety of things we could imagine. And if we just look at our planet, again, we see the variety is beyond our imagination, really. We discover things that we didn't know were possible.
How likely, Doctor, do you think it is that we're going to be around as human beings will be around long enough to begin to answer some of these impossibly important questions about how we got here?
Well, I think we've already made so many discoveries. I think that there's this, one of the callers also brought this up, this sort of double-edged quality between knowing more about the universe and feeling insignificant as a result, feeling not special. We're not at the center of the solar system. Maybe we're not a chosen species put down here. And, maybe we have to confront these things that seem painful and difficult and demeaning. And yet, in the very process of understanding that we orbit the sun and that there was a beginning to the universe and that we have a certain place in the history of the cosmos, I think that should make us feel very significant, very special, that we do have an ability to know the universe and relate to it in that way. So do I think that our species will be around long enough to unravel
Yes.
all of these mysteries? I think that we will continue to unravel great mysteries as long as we're around, and hopefully, we'll wise up about our place on this planet and the sanctity of life on this planet.
Before we destroy ourselves.
That's right.
Okay, off to just over the hill from me, Las Vegas. Kish, I believe it is. You're on the air with Dr. Levin.
Hi, Art. Good evening, Dr. Levin. Good to hear you. Art, before I say something, I just want to tell you I'm 42 years old, and I remember listening to you as a teenager on 7:20 a.m. My mom would have to come in and tell me to turn the radio off because I've been an insomniac ever since I was a child.
It's been a while.
So thank you for many years of fascinating, mind-bending, wonderful topics.
Thank you.
Doctor, first let me say respectfully that I'm going to disagree with just about everything you've said, and I'm not about to question your academic credentials. It's obvious that you're a very brilliant woman. But I remember a time when people used to say the theory of evolution, and nobody found the missing link, nobody proved anything, but we dropped theory, and we just started saying, yep, we proved it. And I've heard you tonight say, oh, it's proven, I can prove it, I can prove it, I can prove it. And then I've heard you say, I think, I believe, I want to believe, I can't wrap my arms around. And respectfully, when you said Einstein, spoke poetically of a God, no, he didn't. I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are details. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. I mean, he has so many references to God. Most of all, my religion consists of a humble admiration of an imitable superior spirit who reveals himself in the details we are unable to perceive with our frail and feeble minds. The Big Bang Theory, Art asked you early on if you believed in the Big Bang Theory, and you said absolutely. And I want one brilliant person such as yourself to sit down with me and show me how mathematically, because it's impossible, it can't be done, how mathematically the sun was placed in a perfect spot so that we weren't burned up or that we didn't freeze, that the moon was put in a perfect place, that the tides worked, that one planet in our universe rotates the opposite direction of all of the other planets in the universe. Like I said, God bless you. I know you've gone to school and you've worked hard, and I'm not even going to begin to compare my academic background to yours because you're obviously a very brilliant woman. But when did we make all of these theories truths without any change in fact?
Can I jump in now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
No, so I absolutely appreciate your skepticism, and it's fair to be skeptical and try to look for the evidence yourself. But it's not the case that we're just saying this is true without fact. It's really not the case. You have to remember, Einstein did not want to believe that the universe was expanding. He did not want to believe in the Big Bang. It was the overwhelming observational evidence that made him change his mind. And that is what we're talking about. We're not talking about people wanting to believe in the Big Bang or having this fantasy about it. And there was a time when we didn't know one way or the other, and then you do look at the evidence. And I have to say, it's not true that you cannot prove mathematically why planets are in the locations that there are. You can mathematically prove why there are stable locations for the planets. And if you align a whole bunch of planets in all of the possible stable locations, one of them happens to be special, the Earth. We are on the Earth not because, because it is in this location, and that's why we're not on Venus, and that's why we're not on Jupiter. It's not, human beings evolving on the surface of Jupiter because the conditions are so different at those other stable points. So it's really not that case. I can prove that to you mathematically, and I can use very simple mathematics to do it. Very old-fashioned, pre-20th century mathematics and physics to do that.
But Einstein coming around to an expanding universe doesn't necessarily indicate that he believed in the Big Bang Theory. I don't believe in the Big Bang Theory, and I believe in an expanding universe because God said that my creations are without number.
Well, Einstein did believe in the Big Bang Theory because by the Big Bang Theory, what we mean is that there was a period of extremely hot primordial soup which underwent afterwards a rapid expansion, and we have lots of detailed evidence that that's the case. We can chart that 3 minutes after the universe was created, that elements should have been synthesized in a particular ratio of abundances. And in fact, that is confirmed by observations to stunning accuracy, really exciting and impressive result. And we also can measure something called the cosmic background radiation, which is a glow and a heat left over from the Big Bang. Now, these are very, very strong observations, and we can study these in detail. And in fact, the Nobel Prize in 2006 was awarded to people who had measured this radiation left over from the Big Bang to such stunning accuracy and revealed all of these details about the early history of the cosmos. So I just absolutely must lay down that it is not the case that we simply believe this because we want to believe this. Yeah, we believe this because the evidence is overwhelming.
But therein lies, I go back to the start of my argument when you reference the people who won the Nobel Prize that they proved this about the Big Bang Theory is based on other assumed assumptions that we have taken for granted. So, yep, okay, some scientists said this. We're able to say 2 + 2, so yeah, everybody's going to agree with that. The scientific community is, but it still goes back to the fact that there are 12 million.
Listen, can I just interrupt you for a second? I'm not sure what you're saying by they believe it because it's a theory. I might have a theory of electromagnetism and radiation and light, and yet it's really not about my theory. If I walk into a room and I turn on the switch, I have a measurement and experience that the room is full of light. It either is or it isn't. And so these are observations of light, of simple electromagnetic radiation. They're not difficult or abstract or surreal. They're really just like pointing a telescope in the sky and seeing something. It's not about my theory whether or not I'm seeing something out there. My detectors are picking up electromagnetic radiation. We are seeing things out there. We are seeing galaxies out there. We're seeing them expand, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's true that our theories shape how we interpret that data, but we simply are living in a bath of radiation that's very cool, that matches our predictions for what the Big Bang should be leaving today to incredible accuracy. And not only that, but this radiation is exactly the same in every direction that we look, to 1 part in 100,000. It's an absolutely stunning observation. It is not like anything else we've ever seen before, and that's why the Nobel Prize keeps being doled out for this discovery, because it is so incredibly impressive.
Like I said, I had no intention of being disrespectful. It's been a fascinating show. I've loved listening to you. I agree with one caller. You have a wonderful laugh. But I think the most valuable thing that Einstein left us was the single quote where he said, "Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind." 100 years ago, no scientist would have thought of advancing a theory that did not have biblical or theological backing. Now, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Okay, I'm just saying that I'm 42 years old. And I remember in school everybody talking about the theory of, and I know we're talking about Big Bang, and I'm kind of mixing two of them, but I always remember the theory of evolution, the theory of evolution, the theory of evolution. And now I have teenagers in high school, and I'm at meet the teacher day and everything, and all of a sudden I'm hearing about the fact of evolution. Did somebody discover the missing link? Did I miss that?
Well, let me just say that I appreciate skepticism, and I think all scientists have to be skeptical. I think that especially at the time when people were discovering the Big Bang and the radiation, even the discoverers, just to put it in perspective, were very skeptical about what they had observed. They didn't believe that this was the radiation left over from the Big Bang. It was too much for them, and they weren't even sure they believed in the Big Bang. And so it's really what I love about this kind of discovery is that it's not about belief, and that they were forced to change their minds, and they were forced to accept the evidence. And so I think that is why it's so important to make clear that there is evidence for this. And as for believing that science is compatible with religion or not, people can frame that in different ways. And, I certainly don't disrespect other people's belief systems, but I think it's very important not to claim that the Big Bang is simply some belief system I have that doesn't have evidence. That's all that I think is important to make clear.
How do you interpret what he quoted Einstein as saying about science? Oh, yeah.
Well, yes. There are, again, you could probably turn to a historian of science, but there are many direct quotes where he very clearly stated in no uncertain terms that he did not believe in a supernatural entity. And so, whether people want to argue that he went in and out of his convictions, I think is unlikely. But I don't think it really matters. Einstein, that was belief. It's not a matter of just accepting Einstein's beliefs because he was a great mind. That's not what we do. We look at Einstein's theories and we scrutinize them with great skepticism, and we test them against observations. And that's what's made it survive, not because he was a great mind who believed something and therefore we believe it too. So I don't think it should really matter one way or another if Einstein believed in God. That's not really relevant. And what's relevant is what's testable and what's reproducible and what we can all share in common, and verify for ourselves.
All right. Tommy in Seattle, you're on with Dr. Levin.
Dr. Levin, hello. Hi, Art.
Hi.
Here's your chance to be incredulous. Bear with me a few moments to the fantastic circumstances behind my question. I'm standing on an alien planet on the surface, and I'm watching flying saucers disgorged from the mothership, and I asked, how does interstellar travel work? And I got these series of mental images of studying a quantum singularity of nearby black hole for several 100,000 years. And they coupled this with tapping the natural energy of the universe into creating immense gravitational fields to the point where time does not exist. And this is used for instantaneous interstellar travel, according to what they told me. Now, this is sort of like a beam that goes from here to there, like a laser beam, and they enter this field and drift a few feet, turn it off, and they're there. No elapsed time involved between going from here to Aldebaran or wherever and back. and I'd like your comments on the feasibility of that.
Well, Art, do you have comments on the feasibility of that?
No.
Yeah, I think that's probably beyond the scope of my expertise.
I do wonder, though, Doctor. I mean, we've had thousands and tens of thousands of incredible sightings of things that apparently have been visiting this planet, and so many that one has to wonder if there is other life out there, and other life has managed to make an incredible journey. Perhaps we are being monitored. Since the discovery of Element 92, perhaps we bear watching, and we are being watched. It could be so, Doctor. Who knows?
Well, I think if you look back in the history of our own history and when we first developed, let's say, tools or transportation, we're talking 100 years, not very long, that we've been able to fly, or it's not even that long, and certainly, cars, or, it's all in the past a couple hundred years that we've had that kind of industrial revolution, that we've had those capabilities. So in the history of 14 billion years, that's just a bleep of a second. Mm-hmm. So I again, have to ask, why is it that there's another civilization that's doing the exact same thing at the exact same time in this bleep in history? That's what seems really unlikely to me. But, just
right.
throwing probabilities out there.
John in Oklahoma, you're on with Dr. Levin. Hi.
Hi. I had a bunch of questions, but probably don't have time for them. I was wondering what your definition would be of the word universe.
It's a good question, really. I mean, by universe, I really mean space-time. So it's a good question, because if I imagine that what we're used to calling a universe, that is to say, this plume, this bubble, or this expanding space-time from what looked like a hot, early, rapidly expanding, what we now call Big Bang type of episode, if that is really just like a branch off a tree, or if I imagine the ginger root, just a bubble off the ginger root, and then there are, loosely speaking, other universes out there, other bubbles and other plumes, I'm inclined to call all of them one big universe, a megaverse, so to speak, and just to say that this is our patch of the megaverse, and this might be the only patch that we'll ever be able to know about or ever be able to communicate with, but it is smoothly connected in some sense to a larger space-time. So to me, the universe is space-time and any continuous flow between space-time.
Doctor, it has been such a pleasure having you on the program. You've really been a joy. You've got two books, A Madman Dreams of Turing Machines and How the Universe Got Its Spots, Diary of a Finite Time in a Finite Space. So, Doctor, thank you, and surely we will have you back again.
Thank you so much, Art. It was really a lot of fun.